The steel bracelets clicked around my wrists with a finality that made my stomach drop. Through the windshield of my truck, I could see my daughter frozen on our front porch, her backpack sliding off her shoulder as she watched her father being arrested. Sheriff Sheila Dawson stepped between us, deliberately blocking my view, her badge catching the morning light. "Where are the other vehicles, Mr. Reynolds?" she demanded, her voice carrying just enough for the neighbors to hear. "What vehicles?" I asked, genuinely confused. She leaned in close, her breath hot against my ear. "The ones you stole from my department." My heart hammered against my ribs. I have never stolen anything in my life. The sheriff laughed, not the kind that carries humor but the kind that drips with power. "We found the evidence in your shop. Registration documents with county seals, keys that open county vehicles." It was then that my confusion transformed into horrifying clarity. Those were the legal towing documents I had filed, the spare key I had logged when I towed her illegally parked cruiser. And that is when I realized Sheriff Sheila was framing me for stealing my own business. I have always been known as the man with grease under his fingernails. Those dark crescents that no amount of scrubbing can fully remove have been my constant companions for the past 15 years. My name is Michael Reynolds, and I own Reynolds Auto Repair and Towing in the small town of Cedar Creek, population 8,742. My father started this shop 43 years ago with nothing but determination and a toolbox he had inherited from his father. The building itself stands as a testament to honest work. Cinder block walls painted a practical blue, 3 service bays, and a small office where the real business happens. Every morning I arrive at 5:30, not because we open that early, but because the quiet of dawn gives me time to prepare for the day ahead. I check the appointment book, organize invoices, and sometimes just sit with a cup of coffee and listen to the building settle around me. This was my inheritance, not just the structure or the tools, but the reputation my father built, one repair at a time, one satisfied customer after another. Cedar Creek is the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where your word is your contract, and a handshake carries more weight than any signature on paper. My customers trust me because they trusted my father, and because I have never given them reason to doubt. I charge fair prices, I do quality work, and I stand behind every repair that leaves my shop. The towing service was my addition to the family business. 10 years ago, I saw an opportunity when old man Guthrie retired and sold his towing company. I took out a loan, bought 2 trucks, and expanded our services. Now, we handle everything from breakdowns to accidents to impounds for the city. The contract with Cedar Creek Municipal Authority accounts for 30% of my annual revenue, a contract renewed without question for the past decade. That morning started like any other. April 17th. I remember the date because it was my late mother's birthday. The air had that perfect spring crispness that makes engine work almost pleasant. I pulled into the lot at my usual time and immediately noticed something was wrong. A black and white Ford Explorer, a police SUV, was parked diagonally across one of my service bay entrances, making it impossible to open the garage door or bring any vehicles in for scheduled maintenance. I checked for a note, looked around for an officer, even called the non-emergency number at the station. Nothing. No explanation. No emergency that would justify blocking a business entrance. Just an empty vehicle parked with the entitled assumption that the rules did not apply to them. I waited 30 minutes. Protocol dictates a 15-minute grace period before towing from a clearly marked commercial entrance. I gave them twice that. When no one returned, I did what any licensed towing operator would do. I logged the vehicle information in our official book, photographed the illegal parking position, and hooked up my tow truck. The SUV was moved to our secure rear lot, not impounded, just relocated, and I left a detailed note on our letterhead explaining where the vehicle could be found and why it had been moved. It was all by the book, legal, documented, professional. I even waived the standard relocation fee as a courtesy to the department. With the bay now accessible, I opened the doors and started the day's work. Mrs. Henderson's Volvo needed a new timing belt. Rick from the hardware store had a brake line issue on his delivery truck. Ordinary problems with straightforward solutions. I sank into the familiar rhythm of my work, hands moving with the confident precision that comes from decades of practice. I thought the matter was settled. A small inconvenience resolved with minimal disruption. I had no idea that my routine act of business protection was about to become the first shot in a war I never wanted to fight. I had no idea that Sheriff Sheila Dawson was about to turn my life upside down over a legally towed vehicle. I had no idea that by the end of the month, I would be repossessing her department's fleet and dismantling her reign over our town one document at a time. The bell above my shop door has a distinctive ring, a clear, bright sound that cuts through the mechanical symphony of the garage. At 10:15 that morning, it chimed with particular urgency, as though the person entering had pushed the door with unnecessary force. I was beneath Mrs. Henderson's Volvo, hands deep in the engine compartment, when I heard Margie, my front desk manager, call my name with an edge of concern in her voice. "Mike, you might want to come out here." I extracted myself from under the hood, wiped my hands on a shop rag, and made my way to the front. That was when I first laid eyes on Sheriff Sheila Dawson. She stood 5'6" in her polished boots, with short blonde hair cut in a severe style that matched her expression. Her uniform was pressed to military precision, and her hand rested meaningfully on her duty belt near her sidearm. Though I had seen her around town since her election 3 years ago, we had never formally met. "Are you Reynolds?" she demanded, her voice carrying a sharpness that silenced the usual bustle of the shop. Even the radio seemed to dim in her presence. "Yes, ma'am, Michael Reynolds. What can I do for you, Sheriff?" I responded, extending my hand. She ignored the gesture. "Would you care to explain why one of my department vehicles was removed from its location this morning?" Her eyes narrowed as she spoke, scanning the office as though cataloging violations. I maintained my professional demeanor. "If you are referring to the Ford Explorer that was blocking my service bay, I had it relocated to our secure lot after waiting 30 minutes. There is no parking allowed in front of the bay doors. The signs are clearly posted." Sheriff Dawson's jaw tightened. "Those signs do not apply to law enforcement vehicles." With deliberate calm, I walked over to my filing cabinet and pulled out the city ordinance book. "Actually, Sheriff, according to Municipal Code 34287, emergency vehicles are exempt only when responding to an actual emergency. There is no blanket exemption for convenience parking." I opened the book to the relevant page and placed it on the counter. She did not even glance at it. "Who authorized you to tow county property?" she demanded, her voice rising just enough for the 3 customers in the waiting area to look up from their phones. "As a licensed towing operator contracted with the city, I am authorized to remove illegally parked vehicles from my property without prior approval. It is all documented here." I slid the logbook toward her, open to that morning's entry with the time-stamped photographs attached. She flipped through the pages with dismissive haste, then pushed the book aside. "This looks like fraud to me." "Excuse me." I blinked, genuinely confused by the accusation. "This whole operation," she gestured broadly around my shop. "I have been hearing complaints, excessive fees, unauthorized tows, and now you are tampering with county emergency vehicles." The accusation hung in the air, absurd and baseless. I had built my business on fairness and transparency. Every customer in the waiting room knew it. Margie's shocked expression reflected my own disbelief. "Sheriff, my towing license and business permits are all current and valid. Every procedure follows city guidelines. If you would like to see my documentation—" "I would actually," she interrupted, her voice laced with a strange satisfaction. "Because from what I understand, your operating license might not be as legitimate as you claim." The waiting room fell completely silent. Mrs. Henderson, who had brought homemade cookies to every oil change appointment for the past decade, audibly gasped. "That is absolutely false," I stated, struggling to keep my voice level. "My business has been properly licensed for 15 years without a single violation." Sheriff Dawson leaned across the counter, her badge catching the fluorescent light overhead. "Then you will not mind if I investigate that claim, will you? Because from where I stand, someone running a scam operation would be very interested in removing police vehicles from the street." The implication was clear and deliberate, spoken loudly enough for everyone present to hear. She was not merely questioning my business practices. She was suggesting criminal intent in front of my customers. In our small town, such accusations spread faster than engine fires. "Sheriff Dawson, I have asked you politely to respect my business. Now I am asking you to leave. Your vehicle is in the secure lot behind the building. The keys are at the front desk. There is no charge." Her smile did not reach her eyes. "Oh, I will leave. But I will be back, Mr. Reynolds, with a warrant, and we will see exactly what kind of operation you are running here." She turned on her heel, collected the keys from Margie's trembling hand, and pushed through the door with the same force that had announced her arrival. The bell jangled violently in her wake. In the silence that followed, I could feel the weight of uncertain glances from my customers. The quiet hum of doubt that could destroy 15 years of reputation in 15 seconds. "Shows are over, folks," I said with a forced lightness I did not feel. "Mrs. Henderson, your Volvo will be ready in about an hour." But as I returned to the garage, my hands were no longer steady. Sheriff Dawson had not come for her vehicle. She had come to make a point, to establish dominance, to threaten. And something in her confidence told me this was only the beginning. The deputies arrived at 4:45 that afternoon, 17 minutes before closing time. Two of them, both young men I recognized from around town but whose names escaped me. They wore the same black uniforms as Sheriff Dawson, but their expressions carried discomfort rather than authority. The taller one held a document in his hand, folded with official precision. "Michael Reynolds?" the deputy asked, though he clearly knew who I was. "That is me," I confirmed, wiping my hands on my shop towel. "What can I do for you officers?" The taller deputy cleared his throat. "We have a warrant to search these premises for evidence related to stolen municipal vehicles and falsified towing documentation." My heart sank to the concrete floor beneath my feet. The document he extended toward me bore the county seal and the signature of Judge Martin Kellerman, Sheriff Dawson's first cousin by marriage, though this connection was rarely discussed openly in town affairs. "Stolen municipal vehicles," I repeated, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. "There must be some mistake." "No mistake, sir," the shorter deputy replied, his eyes not quite meeting mine. "We need to ask you and your employees to step outside while we conduct our search." Margie stood frozen by the register, her reading glasses perched on her nose, invoice in hand. Dale, my senior mechanic for 12 years, emerged from beneath a Subaru, his expression hardening as he assessed the situation. "Let me see that," I said, taking the warrant with greasy fingers. I scanned the document, legal terminology blurring before my eyes, but certain phrases standing out with terrible clarity. Reasonable cause to believe, municipal property, fraudulent documentation, illegal possession. "This is absurd," I stated, my voice sounding calmer than I felt. "Every vehicle on this property is accounted for. Customer vehicles are logged in our system. The only municipal vehicle that has been on these premises today was the sheriff's SUV, which was legally relocated due to improper parking and returned to the department this morning." The taller deputy shifted his weight. "Sir, we need to execute this warrant. Please step outside." I considered arguing further, considered calling my lawyer, considered a dozen responses that might have made things worse. Instead, I nodded to my team. "Margie, Dale, let us lock up and let the officers do their job. Call the remaining customers and let them know we will need to reschedule." We stood in the parking lot as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the asphalt. Through the large bay windows, we could see the deputies opening drawers, photographing documents, examining the vehicles in various stages of repair. When they emerged 45 minutes later, they carried a box containing our official logbooks, the past 3 months of towing invoices, a set of master keys to the storage yard, and most distressingly, the electronic backup drives from our office computers. "We are also impounding these 2 vehicles as evidence," the taller deputy announced, pointing to a Ford F-150 and a Chevrolet Malibu parked in our rear lot. "Those are customer vehicles," I protested. "The Ford belongs to James Wilson. He is waiting for parts to fix his transmission. The Chevy is Sarah Miller's. We just replaced her alternator this afternoon." "The warrant covers vehicles suspected of being illegally obtained or documented," the deputy replied mechanically. "A tow truck will arrive shortly to transport them to the county impound yard." I watched, helpless, as they tagged the vehicles with evidence markers. Sarah Miller was a single mother of 3 who needed her car to get to her nursing shifts at the county hospital. James Wilson ran the local feed store and used his truck for daily deliveries. Both were about to discover their transportation had been seized in a case that made no sense. By nightfall, news of the raid had spread throughout Cedar Creek. My phone began ringing with calls from concerned friends, confused customers, and eventually, the local newspaper. Dale stood by me in the darkened parking lot long after Margie had gone home in tears. "What is this really about, Mike?" he asked, his voice gruff with concern. "I wish I knew," I answered honestly. "But whatever it is not about stolen vehicles." The following morning, the damage became clearer. My first appointment called to cancel, then another. By noon, half our schedule had emptied. The local paper ran a front-page story with the headline, "Local Towing Company Under Investigation for Vehicle Theft." No details, no context, just the explosive suggestion that Reynolds Auto Repair, a business that had served Cedar Creek for over 4 decades, was somehow involved in criminal activity. At 1:30, I received a call from Thomas Greening at First National Bank. The construction loan for our planned garage expansion was being placed on hold pending resolution of legal matters. At 3:15, the regional manager for Midwest Auto Parts Distributors informed me they would need to reevaluate our credit terms given the uncertain situation. By week's end, 2 major fleet maintenance contracts, accounting for nearly 40% of our monthly revenue, had been pulled. The official letters cited concerns about service continuity and quality assurance issues, but the timing made the real reason obvious. No business wanted to be associated with a company under criminal investigation, especially one accused of stealing vehicles. I sat alone in my office Friday evening, surrounded by the ghosts of ringing phones that had fallen silent, looking at the empty spaces where my logbook should have been. On my computer screen was an email from my attorney. The warrant had been legally executed, but the grounds were questionable at best. Fighting it would take time during which my family's legacy would continue to bleed customers and credibility. In 15 years of business, I had faced recessions, supply shortages, and cutthroat competition. But nothing had prepared me for this. A systematic dismantling of everything I had built, orchestrated by a woman with a badge and a grudge over a legally towed SUV. As I locked up that night, I glanced at the empty space where Sarah Miller's Chevy had been parked. Her confused, frightened voice on the phone still echoed in my mind. "Mr. Reynolds, they said my car was evidence." Evidence of what? What is happening? What was happening was clear now. This was not law enforcement. This was persecution, and it was only beginning. Monday morning found me in the sterile waiting room of the county business licensing office, a manila folder of documentation clutched in my hands. The receptionist avoided eye contact as I approached, her fingers suddenly busy with reorganizing paper clips. "I need to verify my business license status," I stated, placing my driver's license on the counter. "I have reason to believe there may be questions about its validity." 20 minutes and several uncomfortable interactions later, a balding clerk confirmed what I already knew. "Your automotive repair license is current through December. Your towing operator certification is valid until March next year. All your permits are in order, Mr. Reynolds." I requested printed verification of this information, official documents bearing the county seal. The clerk's eyes darted nervously to his supervisor's office before he complied. By noon, I sat across from Lieutenant Harold Morris at the Internal Affairs Office of the County Sheriff's Department. The small office smelled of coffee and disinfectant, and Morris looked as though he would rather be anywhere else. "I understand your frustration, Mr. Reynolds, but without specific evidence of misconduct, there is not much we can do," he explained, sliding my formal complaint back across the desk. "Sheriff Dawson obtained a legal warrant. The investigation is ongoing." "The warrant was based on false premises," I insisted. "There were no stolen vehicles. My business documentation is completely legitimate. I have the verification right here. This is harassment, plain and simple." Lieutenant Morris sighed, the sound of a man caught between protocol and conscience. "Look, I can file your complaint. It will be reviewed. But I should warn you that complaints against the sheriff they tend to get complicated." His meaning was clear enough. Sheriff Dawson was not someone who took criticism lightly, and the department knew it. I left the county administration building with nothing but official confirmations of what I already knew and a complaint that would likely never see action. The system that was supposed to prevent abuse of power was instead enabling it. That evening, as I was locking up the shop, now eerily quiet with half our usual business, a pickup truck pulled into the lot. It parked far from the building, headlights off, engine running. Cautious after the events of the past week, I placed my hand on my cell phone, ready to call for help if needed. The driver's door opened and a man stepped out, hands visible and empty. Even in the dim light, I recognized him, Deputy Mark Summers, who had left the department 6 months earlier without explanation. "Mr. Reynolds," he called softly, "got a minute to talk?" We ended up at Denny's off the highway, seated in a back booth where the fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, and the coffee tasted like it had been brewing since morning. Mark Summers hunched over his mug, eyes constantly scanning the entrance. "I left because I could not do it anymore," he explained, voice low despite the relative privacy. "The way she runs that department, it is not right." "The sheriff," I prompted. He nodded. "Sheila has a system. She keeps track of people who cross her, business owners who refuse to give discounts to the department, citizens who question her at town meetings, anyone who does not show proper respect." I felt a cold certainty settle in my stomach. And then she targets them. Inspections, citations, traffic stops. Nothing illegal on paper, just the full weight of law enforcement suddenly focused on making your life difficult. Mark's fingers tapped nervously against his mug. "When I objected to a warrant she wanted for a local farmer, same kind of baseless search she did on you, she put me on midnight shifts for 3 months. When I still would not play along, my performance reviews tanked. Eventually, I got the message and resigned." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. "Because what she is doing to you is wrong, and because you seem like the kind of person who might actually stand up to her." Mark reached into his jacket and removed a small notebook. "I kept records, dates, locations, names of businesses targeted, pattern of harassment. Nothing that would stand up in court on its own, but enough to establish a pattern if someone were building a case." I took the notebook, feeling its weight, not just the physical heft but the weight of what it represented: evidence, testimony, ammunition. "She will come after you if she finds out," I warned. Mark's smile was grim. "She already did. That is why I have nothing left to lose." As I drove home that night, Mark's notebook secured in my glove compartment, my mind raced with possibilities. The system had failed me. The official channels had offered no recourse. But perhaps there was another way, not through force or confrontation, but through the very bureaucracy Sheriff Dawson was exploiting. If she wanted to play with paperwork and legal loopholes, I could play that game too. I had spent my entire career documenting every detail, following every regulation, crossing every T and dotting every I. It was time to use those same skills offensively rather than defensively. The next morning, I called my lawyer again, not to file another complaint but to develop a strategy. If Sheriff Dawson wanted a war of attrition, she would learn that I had resources she had not anticipated. I was done being reactive. It was time to take control of this narrative. "What is the process for filing a civil suit against a county official?" I asked. The answer was complicated, expensive, and risky. But for the first time since Sheriff Dawson had walked into my shop, I felt something other than helpless anger. I felt purpose, determination, and the first flickers of a plan that would eventually bring her entire house of cards crashing down. I started a spreadsheet that night, meticulously documenting every interaction, every loss, every piece of evidence. Mark's notebook provided the historical context for what I was experiencing firsthand. This was not an isolated incident. It was a pattern of behavior that had gone unchecked for far too long. Someone needed to stand up, and since no one else would, that someone would have to be me. The civil lawsuit landed on Sheriff Dawson's desk with the bureaucratic equivalent of a thunderclap. 47 pages of detailed allegations: business interference, defamation, abuse of power, malicious prosecution. My attorney, Alina Winters, had constructed it meticulously, each claim supported by documentation, witness statements, and the pattern of behavior established by Mark Summers' records. "The goal is not necessarily to win in court," Alina explained as we filed the paperwork. "The goal is to create a paper trail too substantial to ignore, to force oversight, to make this public." Public it became. The Cedar Creek Gazette ran the story on page 3. Local business owner sues sheriff over alleged harassment. 3 days later, the regional paper picked it up. Mechanic accused of stealing his own lot fights back. By the end of the week, a reporter from the state capitol called asking for an interview. I spoke carefully, sticking to verifiable facts. I described the towed SUV, the retaliatory search, the seized customer vehicles. I explained how decades of reputation had been damaged in days. I never speculated about Sheriff Dawson's motives or character. I did not need to. The facts spoke clearly enough. Parallel to the lawsuit, Aliner filed a formal request for a hearing with the State Business Commission, alleging targeted harassment of a licensed business operator. Such hearings were rare. The commission typically dealt with licensing disputes and regulatory matters, but the evidence we presented was compelling enough to warrant attention. The Commission has regulatory authority over how law enforcement interfaces with licensed businesses, Aliner noted. If they determine that your business was targeted inappropriately, it creates an official finding that can support our civil case. The machinery of bureaucracy grinds slowly, but it does grind. 2 weeks after filing our complaints, the mayor's office contacted Sheriff Dawson with a request to de-escalate the situation pending resolution of the formal complaints. It was a politely worded suggestion to back off, a political recognition that the growing media attention was becoming problematic for the town's image. Sheriff Dawson's response was to double down. The following morning, 2 deputies appeared at my shop with citations for improper hazardous waste disposal and inadequate fire suppression equipment. Minor technical violations that every repair shop in the county could likely be cited for if subjected to sufficiently motivated inspection. Each citation carried a $500 fine. Each required documentation of correction within 30 days. Each created more paperwork, more expense, more distraction. But while Sheriff Dawson was throwing punches in the open, I was quietly gathering evidence for a counterstrike she would never see coming. Aliner had connected me with a paralegal who specialized in municipal records research. Together, we began digging into the Sheriff Department's fleet management documentation. Public records requests yielded maintenance schedules, acquisition paperwork, and, most importantly, leasing agreements. What we discovered was illuminating. 3 years ago, when Sheriff Dawson took office, the department had shifted from purchasing vehicles outright to leasing them from a regional company called Midwest Municipal Fleet Services. The move had been presented as a cost-saving measure, spreading the expense of vehicle acquisition over time rather than depleting the annual budget. What had not been publicly discussed were the terms of those leases, particularly the payment schedules and default conditions. Further investigation revealed that the county had missed 2 payments on several vehicles, including Sheriff Dawson's personal unit. According to the leasing contract, this placed those vehicles in technical default, subject to potential repossession. "This is gold," the paralegal whispered as we reviewed the documents in Aliner's office. "They do not own those vehicles. They are essentially renting them, and they are behind on the rent." Aliner was more measured. "It is an angle, certainly, but we need to be careful about how we use this information. Directly confronting the sheriff department about their financial delinquency could be seen as antagonistic. More antagonistic than falsely accusing me of theft and destroying my business?" I asked. She conceded the point with a thin smile. "Fair enough. What exactly did you have in mind?" What I had in mind was elegant in its simplicity. I had not built my business by being reckless or reactionary. I had built it by understanding systems, following rules, and executing precisely. Now I would use those same skills to create a moment of perfect legal justice. I contacted Midwest Municipal Fleet Services directly, introducing myself as a licensed towing operator concerned about potentially handling vehicles with complicated ownership status. I explained the situation factually, that I had recently relocated a vehicle from my property that I now had reason to believe might be in lease default. The representative checked their records. Yes, the Cedar Creek Sheriff's Department is currently 64 days delinquent on several units, including the command vehicle assigned to Sheriff Dawson. According to our contract terms, those vehicles are technically eligible for repossession. I asked the critical question: in such cases, who is authorized to execute the repossession? The answer was exactly what I had hoped: any licensed recovery agent or towing operator with proper documentation of the default status. One more piece fell into place. With trembling hands, I logged into the county tax assessor's website and looked up the property records for the sheriff's department. The parking area where their vehicles were kept was not, as most people assumed, part of the government complex. It was a separately deeded lot, technically classified as a public parking area with restricted access, not sovereign government property where I would need special permission to operate. Each document I gathered was another piece of the puzzle, another thread in the web I was carefully weaving. Sheriff Dawson thought she was fighting me with badges and intimidation, but I was about to remind her of a fundamental truth. In America, paper can be more powerful than any badge. As I collected the final documents I would need, I felt no malice, no thirst for revenge. This was not about hurting Sheriff Dawson. It was about restoring balance, about demonstrating that even those who enforce the law must follow it, and about reclaiming what was mine, not just my business but my dignity. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a municipal filing system that most citizens never interact with. During my third night of poring over public records, I discovered something that made me sit upright in my office chair, heart suddenly racing. The Cedar Creek Sheriff's Department did not own their vehicles. Not a single one. Not even Sheriff Dawson's personal unit. 3 years ago, when Sheila Dawson took office, the department had shifted from purchasing vehicles outright to leasing them through a company called Midwest Municipal Fleet Services. The change had been presented to the County Budget Committee as a cost-saving measure. By spreading payments over 5 years rather than making lump-sum purchases, the department could maintain newer vehicles without draining their annual capital budget. It was a common enough municipal arrangement. What was uncommon, and what the tired county clerk had accidentally included in my records request, was the payment history for the past 18 months. The file showed a pattern of increasingly delinquent payments, 2 months overdue, then caught up, then 3 months behind. The most recent entry showed the department 64 days past due on their fleet payment. "Eleanor," I said into my phone, voice hushed despite being alone in my office, "I need you to look at something. Now." My attorney arrived 20 minutes later, professional as always despite the late hour. She studied the documents with the careful attention of someone accustomed to finding meaning in bureaucratic language. "This is interesting," she admitted, "but what exactly are you thinking?" "I am thinking about the repossession clause on page 14, I replied, flipping to the relevant section. "Every lease agreement for financed vehicles includes default provisions. If they miss enough payments, the lessor has the right to reclaim their property." Eleanor's eyes widened slightly as she grasped my intent. "You are not suggesting—" "I am suggesting exactly that," I confirmed. "I want to know if, as a licensed towing operator, I have the legal authority to repossess vehicles on behalf of the leasing company. The next morning, I placed a call to Midwest Municipal Fleet Services. I identified myself professionally, explaining that I operated a towing service and had recently interacted with one of their leased vehicles, specifically, a Ford Explorer registered to the Cedar Creek Sheriff's Department. I am calling because I have concerns about the ownership status of this vehicle, I explained carefully. My records indicate there may be an issue with the lease payments. As a towing operator, I need to ensure I am handling these vehicles appropriately. The fleet manager on the other end of the line was initially hesitant. "Sir, we cannot discuss specific account details with—" "I understand your privacy concerns," I interrupted smoothly. "I am not asking for account details. I simply need to know, hypothetically speaking, what your company's procedure would be for vehicles that are more than 60 days delinquent on payments, and whether, as a licensed recovery agent, I would be authorized to execute a repossession if requested." The conversation that followed confirmed everything I needed to know. Yes, the Cedar Creek Sheriff's Department was substantially behind on their payments. Yes, under the terms of their contract, the vehicles were technically eligible for repossession. And yes, any licensed towing operator with proper documentation could legally execute that repossession on behalf of the leasing company. I requested the official default notice be emailed to me. The document arrived within the hour: formal letterhead, specific vehicle identification numbers, clear authorization. I printed 3 copies. That afternoon, I drove past the sheriff's department, studying the layout of their parking area. The main lot where most cruisers were parked was separated from the county administration building by a narrow access road. Crucially, this lot was not part of the secure compound. It was a standard parking area with restricted access signage, but no physical barriers beyond a chain-link fence with a gate that remained open during business hours. I waited until Wednesday, the day Sheriff Dawson attended the weekly county budget meeting. I knew she would take her personal unit, leaving it parked in the county administration lot from 2 until 4. At exactly 2:15, I pulled my tow truck into position near the entrance to the lot. Dale sat in the passenger seat, video camera ready. "You sure about this, Mike?" he asked, tension evident in his voice. "I have never been more sure of anything in my life," I replied, sliding the official repossession notice onto the dashboard. We waited 13 minutes before Sheriff Dawson emerged from the building, walking briskly toward her vehicle with 2 administrative staff members. As they paused by the Explorer to continue their conversation, I eased the tow truck forward, positioning it directly behind the sheriff's vehicle. What followed felt like a scene from a movie playing in slow motion. I exited my truck, clipboard in hand, and approached the group with professional confidence. The administrative staff noticed me first, their expressions shifting from surprise to confusion. Sheriff Dawson turned last, her face registering first irritation, then shock, then fury as she recognized me. "What do you think you are doing, Reynolds?" she demanded, hand instinctively moving toward her hip where her sidearm rested. "Good afternoon, Sheriff Dawson," I replied, my voice remarkably steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "I am here on behalf of Midwest Municipal Fleet Services to execute a legal repossession order for this vehicle. Your department is 64 days delinquent on payments, which activates the default clause in your lease agreement." I extended the clipboard with the official documentation. "This is your copy of the repossession notice. I will need the keys, please." Her face flushed deep red. "This is official county property. You cannot touch it." "Actually, it is not county property," I corrected calmly. It is leased property on which payments have not been made. The registered owner is Midwest Municipal Fleet Services, and they have authorized this repossession. I can connect you with their office if you would like to discuss the matter with them directly. The administrative staff backed away slightly, sensing the dangerous energy radiating from their boss. One of them pulled out a phone, presumably to call for backup. I remained where I stood, the clipboard still extended. "This is harassment," Sheriff Dawson hissed. "This is retaliation." "This is business," I replied simply. "Just like towing a vehicle that was illegally parked across my service bay, just business." She snatched the clipboard from my hand, scanning the document with increasingly frantic eyes. I could see the moment she realized the paper was legitimate. Her posture stiffened, her breathing changed. For the first time since this conflict began, Sheriff Sheila Dawson looked uncertain. 20 minutes later, after heated phone calls to the leasing company and the county attorney, Sheriff Dawson watched helplessly as I winched her Explorer onto my tow truck. A small crowd had gathered, other county employees, curious bystanders, and at least one person recording the scene on their phone. As I secured the final strap, Sheriff Dawson approached me once more, her voice low and threatening. "This is not over, Reynolds." I looked her directly in the eyes. "You are right about that, Sheriff. It is just beginning." Dale recorded the entire interaction from the passenger seat of my truck. By that evening, the video had been uploaded to 3 social media platforms. By midnight, it had been viewed 20,000 times. By morning, local news stations were running the footage with headlines like "Sheriff's Vehicle Repossessed," "Department Behind on Payments." It was not revenge I felt as I drove away with the sheriff's SUV secured behind me. It was something cleaner, more precise, the satisfaction of perfect execution, of turning someone's own tactics against them, of using the very system she had weaponized to deliver a lesson she would not soon forget. As I backed the Explorer into my secure lot, the same lot where this entire saga had begun, I placed a detailed note on the windshield explaining exactly where the vehicle could be found and why it had been moved. Everything by the book, legal, documented, professional. Just like the first time. The morning after the repossession, I arrived at my shop to find 3 news vans parked in the lot. Reporters with microphones and cameras stood expectantly near the entrance, perking up like hunting dogs when they spotted my truck turning in. "Mr. Reynolds, can you comment on your repossession of the sheriff's vehicle? Is it true the department failed to make payments on their fleet? Did you plan this as retaliation for the search of your business?" I had anticipated media interest, but not this swiftly or intensely. The video had spread beyond local circles, touching a nerve with viewers far beyond Cedar Creek's boundaries. There was something universally satisfying about seeing a powerful figure held accountable by the very system they supposedly upheld. "I have no comment at this time," I told them, walking steadily toward my shop entrance. I was simply fulfilling my professional duties as authorized by the leasing company. Inside, my phone had been ringing continuously since dawn. Margie had filled 3 pages of message slips, reporters, local business owners, and most surprisingly, half a dozen deputies from the sheriff's department itself. "They would not say why they were calling," Margie explained, her voice hushed despite the closed door. "Just that they needed to speak with you privately." By noon, the story had evolved. Midwest Municipal Fleet Services had issued an official statement confirming that the repossession was legitimate and justified under the terms of their contract with the county. Their spokesperson emphasized that multiple notices had been sent regarding the delinquent payments, with no adequate response from department administration. The county treasurer, suddenly under scrutiny, revealed that the sheriff's department had been allocated funds specifically for vehicle lease payments. The question that hung in the air, unspoken but inevitable: where had that money gone? Sheriff Dawson attempted damage control with a hastily arranged press conference on the courthouse steps. I watched the broadcast on the small television in my office, noting how her usually commanding presence seemed diminished somehow. "This situation results from a simple accounting error that is being corrected," she stated, reading from prepared notes. "The vehicles were never at risk of permanent repossession. However, this incident does highlight an ongoing pattern of harassment from a local business owner with a personal vendetta against law enforcement." Her words might have carried weight 2 weeks earlier. But now, with financial impropriety allegations swirling and visible evidence of her department's failings gone viral, her accusations sounded hollow. The reporters pressed her on the payment delinquency, on the department's financial management, on why taxpayer funds allocated for vehicle leases had apparently been redirected elsewhere. She ended the press conference abruptly when questioned about the original incident that had sparked our conflict: the illegally parked cruiser at my shop. By Wednesday afternoon, the first cracks in the wall of silence began to appear. A deputy named Jason Garcia contacted Alina directly, requesting a confidential meeting. We arranged to meet him at a diner 20 miles outside town limits. "I have been with the department for 7 years," he explained, coffee untouched before him, eyes constantly checking the entrance. "Things changed when Sheila took over. The targeting, the pressure campaigns, the lists." "Lists," Alina prompted. "She keeps files on people she considers problems," Garcia explained. "Business owners who question department requests, citizens who speak up at council meetings, anyone who does not show proper deference. There is an actual spreadsheet tracking who needs to be checked regularly." He slid a USB drive across the table. Documentation, internal emails, body cam footage that never made it into official reports, audio from staff meetings where she specifically instructs officers which businesses to target for inspections and traffic surveillance. "Why are you doing this?" I asked quietly. Garcia's expression hardened. "Because I became a cop to help people, not terrorize them, and because what she did to you and others before you is wrong." Over the next 48 hours, 3 more deputies came forward with similar accounts. Anonymous tips began flooding the county ethics hotline. Former business owners from neighboring towns called with stories of similar treatment when they had crossed paths with Sheila Dawson earlier in her career. The dam had broken. After years of silence enforced by fear and intimidation, people were finding their voices. The county council, initially reluctant to involve themselves in what they had dismissed as a private dispute, scheduled an emergency review session. The official agenda item was blandly worded: "Evaluation of Sheriff's Department administrative procedures." But everyone understood the true purpose: determining whether Sheriff Sheila Dawson was fit to remain in office. As I prepared the documentation Alina had requested for the hearing, I found myself reflecting on how quickly things had changed. 3 weeks ago, I had been fighting alone, my reputation in tatters, my business struggling. Now, I was part of something larger, a community finally confronting the corruption that had festered in its midst. The repossessed Explorer remained in my secure lot, untouched. Its presence there had become symbolic, a physical reminder that even those who enforce the law are not above it. And for the first time since this ordeal began, I sensed that justice might actually be possible. The county council chambers were never designed to accommodate large crowds. With a normal capacity of 60 seated spectators, the room was overwhelmed by the estimated 150 people who arrived for the emergency review session. Folding chairs lined the walls. People stood shoulder to shoulder in the back. Local news had set up cameras near the entrance, and a reporter from the state capitol was present, a rarity for any Cedar Creek government proceeding. I sat in the second row beside Alina, watching as council members filed in with unusually solemn expressions. The council chair, Martha Winters, a retired school principal who had served in local government for 22 years, appeared particularly grave as she called the session to order. This special review has been convened to address concerns regarding administrative practices within the Cedar Creek Sheriff's Department, she announced, her voice amplified through aging speakers that crackled with feedback. We will hear presentations of evidence, testimony from relevant parties, and determine whether further action is warranted. Sheriff Dawson sat at a side table with the county attorney, her posture rigid, her expression impenetrable. She wore her full uniform, badges gleaming under the fluorescent lights, a deliberate reminder of her authority. Alina approached the podium first, her manner composed and methodical as she laid out our case. She began not with my story, but with a broader pattern, establishing through documentation how Sheriff Dawson had systematically targeted businesses and individuals who challenged her authority or convenience. What happened to Reynolds Auto Repair was not an isolated incident, Alina explained. It was part of a consistent approach to wielding power in this community, an approach characterized by intimidation, retaliation, and abuse of process. The council members listened with neutral expressions as Alina introduced the first piece of evidence, an internal department email from Sheriff Dawson to her command staff, dated 6 months earlier. I will read directly from this communication, Alina said. We need to maintain regular presence at businesses on the attached list. Citations should be issued for any and all violations, no matter how minor. These establishments require additional supervision until they understand proper respect for department authority. She displayed the attached list on the projection screen. 12 local businesses appeared, including a restaurant that had asked deputies to wait their turn rather than skip the line, a gas station that had questioned excessive loitering by off-duty officers, and a hardware store that had refused to extend unauthorized credit to department staff. The timing of these targeted enforcements is revealing, Alina continued, displaying a timeline that correlated businesses appearing on the list with their interactions with Sheriff Dawson personally. Next came the former deputy's testimony. Mark Summers spoke first, describing how Sheriff Dawson had instructed officers to conduct unnecessary traffic stops on specific citizens. Jason Garcia followed, explaining the unwritten department policy of escalating pressure on those who questioned the sheriff's authority. We were told to make examples of people, Garcia testified, his uniform conspicuously absent as he addressed his former supervisor, to show the community what happens when you cross Sheriff Dawson. The most damning evidence, however, was audio. A recording from a staff meeting 3 days after I had towed the illegally parked cruiser captured Sheriff Dawson's unfiltered reaction. Her voice filled the chamber, harsh and unmistakable. Reynolds thinks he can touch my vehicles. We will see how well his business runs after people hear he is under investigation. Nobody disrespects my department and continues operating in this town. Murmurs rippled through the packed room. Council members exchanged glances. Sheriff Dawson's attorney leaned over to whisper urgently in her ear. The final evidence presentation included footage from a deputy's body camera showing Sheriff Dawson instructing officers to find reasons to issue citations at my shop. "I do not care if you have to measure the height of his sign or count the weeds in his parking lot," her recorded voice declared. "Find something. Anything." When Alina concluded her presentation, the room fell into a loaded silence. Council Chair Winters cleared her throat. "Sheriff Dawson, would you care to respond to these allegations?" Sheriff Dawson rose slowly, straightening her uniform before approaching the podium. Her voice, when she spoke, carried none of its usual confidence. "What you have heard represents isolated incidents taken out of context," she began. "Law enforcement requires firm leadership and consistent enforcement. Certain elements in this community have consistently undermined department authority and public safety. My actions have always been in service of maintaining order." But her defense rang hollow against the weight of evidence. Even her supporters in the room seemed uncomfortable as she attempted to justify what was clearly a pattern of targeted harassment. When Sheriff Dawson finished speaking, Chair Winters announced, "The council will now hear from Michael Reynolds." As I walked to the podium, I felt the weight of every eye in the room. Sheriff Dawson stared directly at me, her gaze still attempting to intimidate. But the power dynamic had shifted irreversibly. "I am not here to seek revenge," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "I am here because a system that allows power to be abused hurts everyone. What happened to my business could happen to anyone who dares to stand up when the rules are broken." I recounted the events simply: the towed cruiser, the retaliatory search, the baseless accusations that had nearly destroyed my livelihood. I described the ripple effects on my employees, my customers, and my family. "I followed the law," I concluded. "I documented everything. I trusted the system to work, and for a long time it did not. But today, in this room, we have an opportunity to restore that system, to remind ourselves that badges and titles come with responsibility, not immunity." As I returned to my seat, Chair Winters addressed the council. "Based on the evidence presented today, I move that this council recommend a formal investigation into Sheriff Dawson's conduct, with immediate administrative leave pending the outcome. Additionally, I recommend scheduling a formal vote on removal from office at our next regular session." The motion was seconded immediately. When the vote was called, all 7 council members raised their hands in unanimous agreement. Sheriff Dawson's face remained stone-like, but her fingers gripped the edge of the table until her knuckles whitened. Chair Winters turned to address Sheriff Dawson directly. "Please surrender your badge and department firearm to the senior deputy present. Your administrative leave begins immediately. This hearing is adjourned." As the gavel struck, marking the official end of Sheriff Sheila Dawson's unchecked authority in Cedar Creek, I felt no triumph or satisfaction, only a weary relief that justice, however delayed, had finally arrived. The system had worked, not automatically or easily, but because people had found the courage to make it work, because someone had finally stood up. The formal vote to remove Sheriff Sheila Dawson from office was scheduled for the following Tuesday. In the intervening days, Cedar Creek experienced a transformation unlike anything I had witnessed in my 15 years of business there. The atmosphere in town shifted, subtly at first, then more noticeably as people began to speak openly about experiences they had previously kept to themselves. A local bartender described how his liquor license renewal had been mysteriously delayed after he refused to comp drinks for off-duty deputies. The owner of the florist shop shared how her delivery van had been pulled over 14 times in a single month after she won a county contract that Sheriff Dawson had wanted directed to her sister-in-law's business. Each story followed the same pattern. Stand up to Sheila Dawson. Face systematic harassment in return. Alina called me on Monday evening, her voice carrying an unusual excitement. The state attorney general's office just announced they are opening a criminal inquiry into Sheriff Dawson's conduct. This goes beyond administrative removal now. They are looking at potential criminal charges for misuse of authority and fraudulent warrant applications. The news sent a complex mix of emotions through me. I had wanted accountability, but I had never set out to destroy another person's life. Then again, Sheriff Dawson had shown no such hesitation when targeting mine. "What does this mean for tomorrow's vote?" I asked. "It makes it a formality," Alina replied. "No council member will vote to retain a sheriff under state criminal investigation, but you should still attend. This is about more than Sheila Dawson now. It is about setting a precedent for accountability." Tuesday morning dawned clear and cool. I opened the shop as usual, determined to maintain normalcy despite the significance of the day ahead. At 2 o'clock, I changed from my work clothes into my only suit, a navy blue ensemble I reserved for weddings and funerals, and drove to the county administration building. The council chambers were even more crowded than during the review hearing. People stood 3 deep along the walls. Community members who had never attended a government meeting in their lives were present, sensing the historic nature of the proceedings. Chair Winters called the session to order precisely at 2:30. Today's agenda contains a single item, a vote on Resolution 2020-342, regarding the removal of Sheriff Sheila Dawson from office due to misconduct and abuse of authority. Sheriff Dawson herself was noticeably absent. Her attorney sat alone at the side table, his expression grim. The vote itself was anticlimactic in its unanimity and speed. Each council member's "aye" rang out without hesitation or qualification. 7 votes. 7 affirmations that the behavior we had documented was unacceptable in a public servant entrusted with power over others. Resolution 2020-342 passes unanimously, Chair Winters announced. Effective immediately, Sheila Dawson is removed from the office of Sheriff of Cedar Creek County. Until a special election can be held, the Council has approved the appointment of Acting Sheriff James Morales from the State Law Enforcement Division to oversee department operations. A man I did not recognize rose from the front row and approached the podium. He appeared to be in his mid-50s, with close-cropped gray hair and the careful manner of someone accustomed to navigating difficult situations. Acting Sheriff Morales comes to us with 30 years of law enforcement experience, Chair Winters explained. He has specialized in department reform and community rebuilding after similar situations in other jurisdictions. The department will remain under direct county oversight until reforms are fully implemented and public trust is restored. Acting Sheriff Morales addressed the assembly briefly, his tone serious but hopeful. "I understand the breach of trust that has occurred here. My first priority will be a comprehensive review of all department practices, particularly those involving community interactions and enforcement priorities. Every citizen of Cedar Creek deserves fair and respectful treatment from those sworn to protect them." As the meeting concluded, I found myself surrounded by people waiting to speak with me. Some were familiar faces, longtime customers offering congratulations. Others were strangers with their own stories of encounters with the former sheriff. One elderly woman gripped my hand with surprising strength. My grandson was targeted for months after he reported one of her deputies for excessive force, she told me, eyes bright with unshed tears. No one would listen. No one would help. Thank you for standing up. Over the following days, letters began arriving at my shop. Handwritten notes from small business owners throughout the county. Emails from people I had never met. Even a formal letter from the State Business Association commending my courage in confronting systemic abuse of power. I had not sought this role, community advocate, symbol of resistance, David to a bureaucratic Goliath. I had simply wanted to run my business in peace, to continue the legacy my father had entrusted to me. But sometimes, circumstances choose your path rather than the other way around. The state investigation into Sheriff Dawson's conduct progressed quickly. Records revealed numerous instances of falsified warrant applications, misappropriated department funds, and selective enforcement targeting personal enemies. What had begun as a conflict over a towed vehicle had exposed a years-long pattern of corruption that had festered beneath Cedar Creek's peaceful surface. 2 weeks after her removal from office, I watched from my office as a news crew interviewed acting Sheriff Morales in front of the department building. The department vehicles had been returned following payment of the overdue lease amounts. New policies were being implemented. Trust was being rebuilt, slowly but steadily. The bad actors have been removed, Morales stated firmly to the camera. This department now serves the community, not the other way around. As I turned away from the window, my eyes fell on the shelf where I kept the spare key to Sheriff Dawson's Explorer, the key I had used to legally tow it that first fateful morning. It remained there not as a trophy, but as a reminder that systems only work when people insist that they do. That justice requires more than laws on paper. It requires the courage to enforce those laws even against those who claim to represent them. And perhaps most importantly, a reminder that sometimes standing up for yourself means standing up for everyone. 6 months passed. Spring turned to summer, summer to fall. Cedar Creek settled into a new normal under acting Sheriff Morales's leadership. The department instituted community oversight panels, transparent complaint procedures, and regular public forums, reforms that would have been unimaginable under Sheriff Dawson's administration. My business gradually recovered. The customers who had abandoned us during the crisis returned one by one, often with apologies for having believed the worst. The contracts that had been canceled were reinstated. By August, Reynolds Auto Repair and Towing was operating at full capacity once again, 3 service bays humming from morning until evening, tow trucks responding to calls throughout the county. But something fundamental had changed within the walls of the shop my father had built. I implemented new training for my entire staff, not just on automotive repair techniques, but on legal rights, documentation protocols, and proper interaction with authorities. Every employee received a digital camera and instruction on how to properly record interactions if questions of legality arose. Our filing system had expanded to include incident logs, communication records, and a dedicated legal reference section. Knowledge is protection, I explained during a staff meeting. We follow the rules, we document everything, and we stand our ground when necessary. Not out of disrespect for authority, but out of respect for proper process. Dale, my senior mechanic who had stood by me through the darkest days, nodded his approval. Never thought I would need a legal education to fix transmissions, but here we are. His joke drew laughter from the team, but the underlying message resonated. We had experienced firsthand how quickly rights could be threatened when power went unchecked. We would not be caught unprepared again. The criminal case against former Sheriff Dawson continued to work its way through the legal system. She had pleaded not guilty to all charges, maintaining that her actions represented appropriate law enforcement discretion rather than targeted harassment. Few in Cedar Creek believed her, but the courts would make the final determination. In September, a production crew from a national news magazine program contacted me. They were producing a segment on rural law enforcement accountability and wanted to feature my story as their centerpiece. "Your case resonates with people," the producer explained during our preliminary interview. "It demonstrates how one person can successfully challenge corruption when they follow the proper channels and refuse to be intimidated." The filming took place over 2 days. They captured footage of the shop, interviewed staff members and customers, and spent several hours with me discussing the entire sequence of events from that first towed cruiser to the ultimate removal of Sheriff Dawson from office. Toward the end of the second day, the reporter asked me a question I had not anticipated. "Do you keep any mementos from this ordeal? Any reminders of what you went through?" Without thinking, I walked to my office shelf and picked up the spare key to the Explorer, the key I had logged when I first towed Sheriff Dawson's illegally parked vehicle. It had remained there through the entire saga, a small metal talisman marking the beginning of an unexpected journey. "Just this," I said, holding it up to the camera, "the key that started everything." "Do you keep it out of satisfaction?" the reporter pressed, "as a trophy of sorts?" I considered the question carefully. "No, I keep it as a reminder that systems only work when people make them work. That sometimes standing up for what is right feels lonely and dangerous, but it is still necessary. And that even the smallest actions, like towing an illegally parked vehicle, can trigger profound change when they challenge the wrong kind of power." After the news crew departed, I stood in the quiet of my shop, listening to the familiar sounds that had defined my life for 15 years. The gentle tick of cooling engines, the whisper of air through ventilation ducts, the distant conversation of my team cleaning up for the day. My father had built this place with nothing but determination and integrity. He had taught me that good work speaks for itself, that community matters, and that principles are not negotiable. I wondered what he would have thought about the path his business had taken, from simple auto repair shop to the center of a controversy that had reshaped our town's governance. I think he would have understood that some battles choose you rather than the other way around. That protecting what you have built sometimes requires more than simply doing good work. It requires defending the very foundation upon which that work stands. A week after the interview aired, a young woman entered my shop. She explained that she was opening a small business in the neighboring county and had seen my story on the news. "I wanted to ask," she said hesitantly, "how you found the courage to stand up when it seemed like the entire system was against you." I thought about the question for a moment, then glanced at the shelf where the Explorer key still rested. When Sheriff Dawson walked into my shop that day, she was not just threatening my business, I explained. She was threatening everything it represented: my father's legacy, my employees' livelihoods, my place in this community. She tried to take what I had built, so I showed her who it really belonged to. I reached for the key, turning it over in my palm. It is not about winning or losing. It is about drawing a line and saying, "This far, no further. This belongs to me and you cannot take it away." The young woman nodded, understanding reflected in her eyes. As she left, I returned the key to its place on the shelf, not as a monument to conflict, but as a reminder of resolution, of justice served not through force or anger, but through persistence and principle. Sheriff Sheila Dawson had wanted to teach me a lesson about power. Instead, She had learned one about accountability. And in the process, our entire community had discovered something essential about the systems we build and the responsibilities we share to maintain them. That was the true repossession, not of a vehicle, but of our collective right to fair treatment under the law. And no badge, no matter how brightly polished, could ever take that away again.